Good afternoon. My name is Charles Lehman. During the next few minutes, I will discuss the role of the 15th Alabama Regiment in the American Civil War. Despite experiencing little combat at the beginning of the American Civil War, soldiers from the 15th Alabama Regiment, who exhibited an intense desire to fight the Federals, contributed greatly to the Confederate cause through their tireless efforts in confronting illness, trial, and fierce opposition. I'm on site here on the banks of the Tennessee River. This is a fitting place to discuss the 15th Alabama because it was on the Tennessee River that one of the great commanders of the 15th Alabama, William C. Oates, led his regiment against the Union at Brown's Ferry and suffered a wound from Union forces. Of note, Oates would become rather famous during the war and go on to serve as governor of Alabama from 1894 to 1896. Oates is significant not only because of his leadership during and after the war, but also because of his accounts of the Civil War. In the beginning of the war, recruiting Alabamians to fight was not a difficult task. Men were full of enthusiasm, longing to fight against the Union. In fact, they were fearful that the war would end before they had the opportunity to engage their enemy. According to one 15th Alabama soldier, following the South's firing on Fort Sumter, Alabama caught up the trumpet and blew a blast so loud that the heart of the old Union leaped and the American continent trembled from center to extremity. William Augustus McClendon, who served in Oates's company, said that there were so many individuals signing up to go fight from southeastern Alabama that there was some concern about who would stay back to care for their homes. In short, men eagerly joined the 15th Alabama. The 15th Alabama was formed in the summer of 1861 at Fort Mitchell, Alabama in Russell County, just across the Chattahoochee River from Columbus, Georgia. Soldiers serving in the 15th Alabama came mostly from the southeastern region of the state of Alabama, including the following counties: Russell, Barber, Macon, Dale, Pike, and Henry. Oates, who was from Henry County and initially served as commander of Company G of the 15th Alabama, recorded how the unit spent considerable time drilling in preparation for its first fight. Oates observed how officers were no more prepared than the enlisted soldiers, resulting in what Oates called a ludicrous scene. However, the soldiers worked hard in becoming more proficient in their skills. Nonetheless, it was perhaps good that the 15th Alabama arrived too late to participate in the First Battle of Manassas. The unit left for Virginia in August 1861 to join with the 21st Georgia, 21st North Carolina, and 16th Mississippi. Soldiers embarked on their journey not realizing that the cost of life in the years ahead would be extremely high. Noah B. Fegan, who served in the 15th Alabama, recorded that only 7 out of the original 130 soldiers from his company made it to the end of the war. Traveling to Richmond was one of the most exciting times for soldiers during the war. Due to the recent Confederate victory at the First Battle of Manassas, citizens flooded the towns and countryside, cheering on soldiers as they passed by them. Oates was especially impressed by the hospitality of the ladies in Augusta, Georgia, who provided ice water, lemonade, and meals for 15th Alabama soldiers. The march to Richmond also provided an opportunity for many soldiers from the 15th Alabama to see Union soldiers for the first time as they passed Libby Prison. McClendon pointed out the lack of sympathy that they had toward the prisoners of war. He said, "We were hard-hearted then, but we learned later to be more sympathetic and render aid in meritorious cases, which was reciprocated." The 15th Alabama arrived at Richmond in the first part of August with 1,033 men, many who were unmarried sons of farmers. On their arrival, soldiers spent their days in training, preparing to face the enemy for the first time. Training, however, was not their only activity. In a letter to his father, Barnett H. Cody talked about how 15th Alabama soldiers spent times playing cards, drinking whiskey, sleeping, fighting sickness, and worshiping. The experience was a mixture of bad and good. The 15th Alabama did not remain in Richmond long. During the third week of August, the unit started marching north to Manassas Junction, putting them closer to the front line. Many had the opportunity to visit the battlefield at Manassas, where they could still see and smell the remnants of war. The biggest enemy the unit encountered at Manassas Junction was measles. Measles spread throughout the camp and resulted in many deaths in the brigade. According to Oates, Confederate authorities made it their practice to keep wounded and sick soldiers at the front or in camp throughout the war instead of evacuating them to the rear where they could receive better treatment. Oates believed that this practice resulted in thousands of unnecessary deaths. Oates said, "The private soldiers and company officers were the men upon whom the success of the Confederacy depended, and everything else should have been subordinated to their comfort and preservation. But on the contrary, they were neglected." It did not help that the unit frequently moved camps. By the middle of September, the 15th Alabama left Manassas Junction and marched a few miles north to the vicinity of Centerville, only to move back down near Manassas Junction for the winter. Fall and winter were very monotonous months for the 15th Alabama soldiers. They spent their months conducting daily drills and waiting with anticipation for the day they would face the Federals. The day of fighting the Union would soon come for the 15th Alabama. In fact, the 15th Alabama would have many opportunities to fight its enemy in 1862 while organized under Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson's division. From May through the middle of December 1862, the 15th Alabama fought in the following battles: Front Royal, 1st, Winchester, Cross Keys, Gaines's Mill, Malvern Hill, 2nd Manassas, Ox Hill, Harper's Ferry, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. All those battles that the regiment fought in took place in Virginia, except for one, Antietam, which took place in Sharpsburg, Maryland. The losses in 1862 were considerable for the 15th Alabama, with nearly 500 casualties from combat alone. The first few battles of 1862 for the 15th Alabama resulted in little action. At the Battle of Front Royal on May 23, 1862, the unit provided a supporting role and witnessed Richard Taylor's brigade as it forced the Federals into retreat from the town. The most significant activity that happened at Front Royals, in Oates' account, was that the 1st Maryland Federal Regiment fought the 1st Maryland Confederate Regiment, illustrating the division that existed in Maryland. The First Battle of Winchester on May 25, 1862, was also most uneventful. The Union Army unleashed some artillery on the 15th Alabama, but the worst suffering the 15th Alabama experienced was poor weather conditions. Cold temperatures mixed with wet wheat soaked the legs of 15th Alabama soldiers. The Battle of Cross Keys was the first real fight for the 15th Alabama, taking place on June 8, 1862. The 15th Alabama lost 10% of its unit. One of the soldiers who died due to injuries at the Battle of Cross Keys was Casper W. Boyd. Boyd wrote a letter to his parents while in the hospital just hours before he passed. Boyd said, "My trust is still in God, who will take care of those who love and serve him. And should we not meet again, my dear mother, in this world, I have assurance we will in another and better, where all is love, peace, and happiness. There no hearts will be made sad, and tears of sorrow shed." As the 15th Alabama fought through the second half of 1862, there was an increase in casualties. At the Battle of Gaines's Mill on June 27, 1862, soldiers from the 15th Alabama received some of the first fire from Union soldiers, engaged in heavy fighting throughout the evening, and participated in the last charge at nightfall. Their rifles were so hot from firing that they could no longer hold them in their hands and had to put them down to find other rifles. In highlighting the efforts of the 15th Alabama, Oates said, "It made a glorious record, but at a frightful cost." In addition to casualties from combat, the unit experienced deaths from heat and exhaustion. Following Gaines's Mill, the 15th Alabama fought just a few days later at the Battle of Malvern Hill on July 1st, 1862, where they experienced few casualties. August and September 1862 were very busy and trying months for the 15th Alabama. The Union injured Oates at the Second Battle of Manassas, along with over 100 other soldiers from the regiment. This number of casualties included many of the field officers. The regiment suffered little at the Battle of Ox Hill on September 1st, 1862, and at the Battle of Harper's Ferry from September 12th through the 15th. However, along with many other units, the 15th Alabama suffered great loss at the Battle of Sharpsburg on September 17, 1862. As the 15th Alabama faced off against the 10th Maine at Sharpsburg, the regiment displayed great courage as it exchanged immense fire with the 10th Maine. The firing was so heavy that the 15th Alabama ran out of ammunition. After exhausting ammunition gathered from the dead and wounded, the unit's commander at the time, J.B. Fegan, wisely ordered his soldiers to the prone position while they waited for more ammunition. This decision likely saved the regiment from annihilation. The 15th Alabama went on to finish the year with its participation in the Battle of Fredericksburg on December 13, 1862. Despite experiencing more casualties at Fredericksburg, mostly from Union artillery, the fighting went well for the regiment. It helped that the unit had October and November to recover and receive a replenishment of troops. In addition, the 15th Alabama benefited from the leadership of Oates. Oates took command of the regiment due to injuries Fegan suffered following Sharpsburg. Oates would continue to distinguish himself in 1863 as he commanded the 15th Alabama at Gettysburg and Chickamauga. As the 15th Alabama arrived at Gettysburg, the regiment would have little time to recover from a very long and exhaustive march. Soon after arriving, the Union bombarded the 15th with heavy artillery. Once the regiment formed on the far right of Hood's division, directly across from Round Top, the 15th Alabama moved forward to conduct its great charge against Union forces on July 2, 1863. As soldiers exchanged heavy fire across the valley, many died before they made it over the stone fence. According to Ron report, Company E of the 15th Alabama made it the farthest and stayed the longest. Oates reported that his regiment made it to the very top of Round Top. Once at the top, Oates thought it would be best to hold the position, but followed the orders of General E.M. Law to proceed forward down the northeast slope toward Little Round Top. Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine welcomed the Confederates with overwhelming fire. Oates's troops held their own for a short time, but Union forces eventually overwhelmed them and forced them into retreat. Oates remained convinced that because of Round Top's higher elevation compared to Little Round Top, that it was the key to victory for the Confederates. Oates stated, "If General Longstreet had crowned Round Top with his artillery any time that afternoon, even though it had only been supported by the 2 Alabama regiments who had possession of it until sunset, he would have won the battle." In the end, the 15th Alabama suffered 362 losses out of 686 soldiers. Although Gettysburg would serve as Oates's first great test as a regimental commander, it would not serve as his last. 2 months later, September 19th through 20th, Oates and the 15th Alabama found themselves at the Battle of Chickamauga. Over 3 decades after the battle, Oates, who was serving as governor of Alabama, had the opportunity to speak to veterans of the war at the 1895 dedication of the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. As Oates shared his experiences as the 15th Alabama commander at the Battle of Chickamauga, he attributed the Confederate victory to the strong and tireless effort of the Confederate soldiers. In Oates' words, they moved like a thunderstorm, which no line, however strong, and even though double, could long resist or withstand. One of the highlights for the 15th Alabama was that they captured a battery of artillery and turned it on the Union. They discharged a round that landed within a few feet of General William Rosecrans. Rosecrans barely escaped without injury or death. The 15th Alabama did not participate in the heaviest part of the fight. Nonetheless, the regiment experienced substantial loss as it engaged retreating Union soldiers in the woods. Losses would continue to mount for the 15th Alabama through the remainder of 1863 as it fought the Union at Brown's Ferry, Lookout Valley, Knoxville, and Bean Station. In total, it suffered over 80 casualties. The most notable event that happened to close out the year was that Oates suffered a wound to his hip from a Union bullet. The incident happened at Brown's Ferry when Oates in the 15th Alabama was first on scene to engage Union troops crossing the Tennessee River. The regiment found initial success against the Union, but in a short time, Federals received reinforcement and overwhelmed the Confederates. The wound that Oates received was serious, but it did not end his command of the 15th Alabama. Oates was well enough by the beginning of May 1864 to command the 15th Alabama at the Battle of the Wilderness from May 5th through the 7th, the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse from May 8th through the 21st, and the Battle of Cold Harbor from May 31st through June 12th. Oates and the 15th Alabama's most notable performance in 1864 was at the Battle of the Wilderness. According to the account of the brigade commander, W.F. Perry, the 15th Alabama perfectly executed an order he gave them. It was the action of the 15th Alabama that saved the brigade from destruction. In Perry's words, the 15th Alabama demonstrated one of the most brilliant movements I have ever seen on a battlefield. After conducting a 60-degree turn, crossing an open field, and charging the Union through the woods, the 15th Alabama drove back a force that was double its size. Union soldiers fled in confusion from the 15th Alabama soldiers. What was most impressive was that the regiment executed the movement in less than 5 minutes from the time it received the order. There were probably many factors that contributed to the success of the 15th Alabama at the Battle of the Wilderness, but one possible factor was the exchange the regiment had with Robert E. Lee just prior to the battle. As the troops were forming, Lee asked the name of the unit. A private from the 15th Alabama spoke up immediately and answered Lee's question. In a powerful voice, Lee said, "God bless the Alabamians." Oates recorded how the men cheered and went into line with a whoop. The advance began. Following the battles of 1864, the 15th Alabama would conclude its service in the American Civil War much like it entered it, with little activity. Compared to what the regiment had endured at such places as Gaines's Mill, Manassas, Sharpsburg, Gettysburg, Chickamauga, Brown's Ferry, and the Wilderness, 1865 was rather uneventful. The regiment would also conclude its service in the war much different than it entered it. In the beginning of the war, soldiers were eager to fight in hopes of a better future. At the conclusion of the war, the hopes and dreams of 15th Alabama soldiers were gone as the unit surrendered April 9, 1865, with only 170 soldiers. In the end, despite the defeat that the 5th Alabama suffered against the Union, the tireless efforts of the devoted Alabamians would remain fixed in the hearts and minds of Southerners for many years to come. Thank you.